Hello again, this is Philip. Thank you for tuning me in. With this lecture module, we'll begin the theory of careers. We'll talk about two key theoretical constructs or theoretical constructions. What's a theoretical construct besides being a fairly ephemeral abstract term? For me, it's a prism. You take that term, that idea, that construct, you put it in front of you, you look through that prism, and as you gaze through it, what you see on the other side becomes clearer, more easy to understand, more easily explained, and hopefully more predictable. For this module, we'll talk about two key ideas, abstracts, or constructs. The first is self-concept, the second is career maturity. They will interact and overlap, but we'll disaggregate them for the moment and then come back and I'll have a few closing remarks. So what is self-concept? Someone's walking down the street. An alien beams in from outer space, stops that individual and says, "Who are you?" Or, "What are you?" If the individual gives a quick, clean, precise, emphatic response, you could infer a reasonably clear self-concept. Self-concept is self-knowledge, how you see yourself, how you define yourself. If that alien beams in front of me and says, "Who are you?" or "What are you?" somewhere in there I'm going to say parent or father. Somewhere in there I'll get to my career and say professor or psychologist. So it's a degree of self-understanding. It's really your self-relationship, but it goes a bit beyond that. Let's say the alien beams down, stops an individual and says, "Who are you?" And very quickly and emphatically the person responds, "I'm Joe DiMaggio, center fielder for the New York Yankees." Well, that may be a very quick and clean self-concept, but it happens to be delusional. So when we think of self-concepts, what we can do is kind of break down what's going on there. At the root, it's your thoughts and ideas, your private vision. You look in the mirror, "This is who I am," and then you give a prose description of who that person in the mirror is. To the extent that that description is also visible in one's behaviors, that seems like an authentic, true, realistic sense of self. If you look at your life and that vision you have of yourself and those behaviors also result in some types of tangibles. So if I say I'm a parent and I have children, that seems like, well, the self-concept is there. And then there's usually some form of external validation to let you know that your self-understanding, your self-relationship is reasonably well grounded. Example, if you did take a moment and look at the website I put on the last memo, that's my daughter. She's 23. If you were around my house when she was 3 years old, 2 decades ago, she'd be taking paper and pencil and drawing. By the time she was out of the 8th grade, finishing what we would call grammar school here, she started high school in the 9th grade, and you read the yearbook that children would have when they were leaving the 8th grade, well more than half of the statements from her fellow students would say something along the lines of, "Sarah, I'll know you be a famous artist, famous costume designer, famous clothing designer," something like this. she probably knew she would be doing something artistic with her life well before she was 10. She had won a lot of events. Her teachers, her peers, and her parents knew this as well. Her self-concept was formed at an early age, for better or worse. When we get a little further into careers, what you could say is, on the plus side, she found her passion, and now she has to go find her job. So I think Sarah would be a good example of an individual who had a clean and clear self-concept, wasn't delusional, and is acting on it right now. A related term is career maturity. It's not the same thing as self-concept. If self-concept is a true, authentic, realistic relationship one has with oneself, career maturity is a true and authentic assessment of two things: what you can do and what the outside world is going to demand. What do I have on the screen there? Career maturity, a readiness for events, realistic goals and dreams. Maybe, I won't say maybe, but that third check mark there is really important, maybe not the most important. The word you could say is planfulness. That is, the dreams are abstract, but your behaviors are concrete enough that you might be able to realize that dream. So when we talk about career maturity, what we're really talking about is not an authentic relationship with oneself, but an authentic assessment of what one can do and what the outside world's going to ask you to do if you want to meet and fulfill those dreams. I'll flip back and forth, but let me make that more concrete and at the same time operational for you. Self-knowledge, attribution, realistic behavior, and goal attainment. That's pretty lengthy. Take a moment in someone's life. You may want to do this with yourself at some point. You may ask these questions of yourself vis-a-vis the folks you'll interview. But what does one do when faced with a challenge? Or more specifically, what does one do when she or he gets some negative feedback from the outside world? The table in front of you is an attributional model that goes well beyond careers, career decisions, career paths. It's an omnibus way of looking at how people steer through all kinds of challenges. But to break it down, let us say you're going to get some negative feedback. Now let's say you did get some negative feedback. How will one react? The first thing that can happen is if you see the individual's reaction, it can go in one of two directions, have one of two vectors: externalize or internalize. Let's stay on the left. Externalize. When one externalizes a challenge or a negative feedback, or if you want to be brutal, a failure, the externalization says something like this: what just went wrong because of something outside me. 30, 40 years ago, I used to be a competitive tennis player. Let us say you hit an overhead and the ball goes into the net, or worse, you lose a match. Well, why did you lose that match? It was windy. I was serving my last game with the sun in my eyes. The lines person was biased against me because that individual liked the other person or liked the particular school that he represented. but something went wrong due to events that were beyond and outside what I could do. All right, so we let that left go. On the right, internalize. Something went wrong. I didn't do well. Again, to be brutal, I failed at this moment. But what went wrong was really due to me. The right column, the internalized column, is a bit more complex. That's why I have the letters A and B. I could say, all right, things didn't go well, and it's because I am, and I'm at letter A static characteristic of who I am, a static characteristic of me. I lost this tennis match because I'm too slow. I lost this tennis match because I'm not quick enough. I didn't get into the University of Michigan Law School because I am not bright enough. So in the externalization column, the fault lies with events outside me. In the internalization column, what went wrong is really due to me, but it's because of who I am as a person. I'm not fast. Letter B, under the internalized column, it is something I did or am doing. So, why did I lose this tennis match? I lost the tennis match because I missed a lot of overheads. I'm not practicing overheads. I lost the tennis match because I double faulted too much. If you take the three scenarios I just laid out, I lost the tennis match because the lines person doesn't like me. I lost the tennis match because I'm too slow. I lost the tennis match because I'm not practicing my second serve or I'm not practicing my overhead. Of those three explanations, only one leads to future behavior. Letter B, under the internalized column. Hopefully I'm making sense. If I lose the tennis match and it's because somebody made unfair line calls, I don't have to do anything. If I lose the tennis match because I'm just too slow, or I don't get into law school because I'm just not bright enough, again, I don't have to do anything. But if I say, I didn't get in law school, but I didn't practice the LSAT, I lost the tennis match because I don't practice my second serve, the letter B tells me I have to do something to get better. So going back to this idea of career maturity, one way to look at mature decisions, and particularly challenges, is how one attributes success and how one attributes failure. A more mature attribution model is letter B. Let me jump back to my daughter for a moment. If you went through that website and looked under her awards, she's won a bunch. That's not even a third of what she's won. 3 years ago, she won the Western United States for costume design as a college student for all graduate and undergraduate. And then she did a year in France, and then she came back last year and she won the West again. She went to Lincoln Center in Washington, D.C. She was down to 8 people in the United States to get best costume designer in the country for a student, graduate or undergraduate. I mean, she didn't win. She didn't even get honorable mention. I was interested to see how she'd react. It's the first time in her life that she actually put out juried work, that is, put out a drawing or put out a book or whatever, in this case her costume, and didn't win. She'd won everything since she'd been like in grammar school. She comes back and I say, all right, what happened? And her response was something along the lines, these people were more experienced, a lot of them were graduate students, but what the judges, the people who were the jury, said is they didn't see all of her work. She's a good artist, so she took all of her renderings that were complete, took pictures of them, and her display was immaculate. And apparently the judges like to see the cognitive process, so a secondary messy drawing on a napkin, those are the kinds of things they were looking for, and hers looked like a museum piece. So she said she has to redesign, or reset up her designs when she does her displays. And then she said the big problem was that her costumes were pretty decent. She didn't get along with the set designer for this one particular play where she was responsible for the costume design. So she didn't work with the set designer. The colors clashed. The judges saw that and marked her down. And then she turns to me and she says, "But these are things I can change." I was really glad to hear that. Really glad. What I heard was effort-based attribution in the face of negative feedback. Here's a 23-year-old person. Her self-esteem's on the line. She sees herself as an artist. She goes and competes. She gets hammered. She internalizes what happened, but she puts it in the context of how future behaviors can increase the likelihood of success. My son, Jeremiah, he's having some difficulties. He stopped after high school and spent 1 year in Big Sky, Montana as a ski bum, working at the ski resort. Then he came back and now he's at UW, but he's floundering a bit. If you ask him the question, "Who are you?" he says to the alien, "Well, I'm a skier. I want to do pro tour ski jumping," and he is pretty good. And if you look at what he's doing, he's saving some of his money to go and compete in some of the pro type of tournaments where the people do the ski jumps and the flips off the vaults and the kinds of things that are kind of scary for a parent to watch. I have to let him go through this process. I don't think he's being career mature in this way. If I look at my daughter, the kinds of things that she says she needs to change, she can probably change. Even if my boy says I have to practice more, he's probably not going to be a pro. It's difficult to make it as a pro skier. He's already 20. He's been trying at it since high school. But I don't think he's ready yet to say no. I don't think he's ready yet to alter his self-concept and say, "Oh, I'm a student." He still wants to be a skier. So we're going to have to let that unfold. But to come back this way, if I look at Sarah now, she's in Chicago. She's living hand to mouth like any starving artist. She's taken a job as a caretaker for a federal judge who has a little bit of Alzheimer's. So that's really her main income while she's working for the Shakespeare Theater in Chicago, trying to make a break, but she knows that she has to pay her dues. We don't know if it'll work out, but when I look at her behavior, I see planfulness, I see a realistic plan, and with luck maybe it'll work out. But to combine career maturity and self-concept, they go hand in hand in this way. The self-concept is clarity of who you are. The career maturity is realistic behaviors that help reinforce that self-concept, and at the same time, you're successful enough with those behaviors that more than just reinforce your worldview, you'll have some successes. So the outside world will come back and say, yes, you are a costume designer. Yes, you are a pro skier. Yes, you are an accountant. Two critical ideas for understanding how individuals approach their careers. A couple of other things. Self-concept is multifaceted. And it will get more so as individuals get older. So that's what I mean by everything is developmental. So if you ask my daughter, who are you? She would say, well, I'm an artist, costume designer. It hasn't got to the point yet where she says I'm a parent or a significant other or a wife or anything like this. She probably hasn't said to herself, I'm a Democrat or a Republican, but so a self-concept is a lot. What we want to do with our project here is focus on self-concept in general. You'll be talking to adults. It will be multifaceted, and at the same time, tease out what about that self-concept was a driving agent as she or he made decisions about one's career path. Developmentally, in addition to being multifaceted, what's important and aspects of one's self-concept will move in and drop out with time. I believe if you asked me 35 years ago, I think tennis player would have been one of the characteristics I would use to describe myself, in the same way that my boy would say skier. When he's 50, it'll probably be leisurely skier. But as we move through time, who we are will also change. And this will be critical for some of the folks that you interview. Let's say you do interview an accountant. If you interview an accountant who's 55 to 62, that self-concept will be moving from I'm an accountant to I'm an about to retire accountant, or I am a retired accountant. And each has different meaning. And how everything interacts would be that, let us say, as you're moving through life, you always wanted to be an accountant. And it turns out that your interests change. It turns out that life changes. And you get drafted if you're my age. Or you stop and have a child. Or you do have a child and the child gets injured and you have to be a caretaker. What'll happen then is the mature decisions you make about that career path will interact with life. Life will come back and influence how you make those decisions. So to pull the idea of career maturity or self-concept out and isolate them from the movement individuals have in life is a bit antiseptic. But as you write up your final papers, it would seem to me that there's going to be some paragraph, some sentences where you'll talk about your interviewee's sense of self, and we'll call it self-concept. You'll talk about your interviewee's decisions and whether they were realistic, and that'll be maturity. The other parallel activity I would like to have happen throughout all the lectures, but we could start here, is that with a cup of tea or something stronger, you can sit down and interview yourself at some point and say, all right, now I know what he's trying to say with this idea of self-concept. Who am I? Am I going through developmental stages? Have I been mature? So with all the lectures, there are three interacting types of dynamics. Understanding what's on the screen because it's part of the learning objectives. Understanding what's on the screen so that it becomes manifest in your writing. And then understanding what's on the screen because at some point in time, something on the screen hopefully will have relevance for you. Okay, what's left? I'll have 3 other career modules, lectures, dealing with 3 other theoretical constructions or prisms. Each is a model, and what I mean by that is, here is a prism of how people make career decisions. Lifespan model is developmental. what happens as people go from womb to post-retirement. Anchors, another word for anchors would be values. What are the anchors or values that hold a person down? And not in a bad way, but keep that person anchored. These are the critical values that I adhere to at a personal level, which influence the kinds of choices I make as I go down my career path or paths. And then stages may or may not be helpful. Career stages really is more of a traditional type of approach to looking at careers. What do you go from project manager to program manager, supervisor, division manager, district manager, as we move up a hierarchy? And some of you will be interviewing entrepreneurs, teachers, perhaps homemakers. That last model may or may not have relevance, but we'll go through all three separately under different audio lectures, and then I'll add one more where I'll come back and talk about the instructions, add some more detail with respect to what you might want to think about in your writing, and then we'll be done. We can have some chats. But for now, think of the self-concept and career maturity constructs as omnibus overarching ideas that people carry with them, which will come back and influence what happens inside those three models of career choice. So thank you for listening. I'll talk to you again soon. See you then.